Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Masterclass. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe, and I hope you're all doing well on this Friday afternoon. We've made it through another week in 2021. If you are tuning in live here on Behance, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. We've got Cody and Laura and Mattia, Cara and Henry, Anahit, Harshal, Golden Rose. Who else do we have in here? Jack is in the house. Abdullah, great to see everyone. New faces, old faces. Hope you're all excited for another Adobe XD Masterclass. If you're new to these things, these are a little bit more advanced than some of the other classes, especially the DCCs. We got Anita from Toronto, hometown. Great to see people from Canada and Toronto. Harshal from India. Aubrey's in a creative slump. Well, hopefully I can help with that. And in these masterclasses, I definitely dive a little bit deeper than I typically do in some of the daily creative challenges, which I am preparing for another one next month. I'm going to be hosting, and I have some fun ideas. And actually, maybe I might sneak a few things in today's class. It's going to be a lot of fun. So, what do we have going on for today? Let's go ahead and hop over to my screen. If you all missed the news, XD36 is now available. Not a massive update, because typically the updates at the very beginning of the year are a little bit smaller. We just came off holiday, prioritizing the roadmap for 2021, but we did sneak in there a little bit of a prototyping feature, and it's definitely not going to be the only prototyping feature of 2021. We do have some fun things coming. So let me go ahead and grab some water super quickly. My mouth is super dry. All right, so the new feature in XD36 is the ability to animate dashes and gaps of your borders. So here's one example that I posted on Twitter, right? You can do like a progress meter or a progress circle going around. Then you can take that to another level and do something like what we're going to do today, which is several progress circles, right? Just like that. And we're going to get a little bit more advanced with this. If I just posted this just a few minutes ago just to promote the masterclass. This one here, if you take a look at this blue circle, the quality is not very good on Twitter. It kind of goes around, and then there's a little bit of a shadow. Now, by default, it cannot do that, right? You can't go past the beginning point, but there are workarounds. And that's what I love about these masterclasses. We kind of go a little bit deeper, we find workarounds, we get creative, and hopefully we get your creative juices flowing. Cara says, that is fancy, I agree. So let's go ahead and hop over to Adobe XD. Henry says, I'm designing a fitness app. There we go, perfect. It's like this masterclass was meant for you, Henry. All right, so we are in Adobe XD again, XD36. If you want this feature, make sure to hop into the Creative Cloud and update. And if anyone has questions throughout this hour, definitely throw them in the chat. I will be looking over and answering some. Someone's asking about the DCCs next week. So on Discord, Gus posted a bit of an update that we're mixing things up a little bit. I believe there's going to be one set of 2 weeks of a DCC every month for XD. And then the other 2 weeks are going to be a rerun of previous ones, because many of you haven't seen some of the previous XD DCCs. So, we're going to kind of get those back into the public eye, and you can still participate in those. But if you want to participate in the 2-week challenge, live ones, then you have a whole month to participate, which is great. All right, so we're in Adobe XD, and we are going to start with a nice large iPhone XR, XS Max 10, however you pronounce it. And we're going to start just like this. We're going to start nice and blank. And we're going to start by building out the container that will house the fitness application that we're working on. Again, it might kind of hint at the DCC that I'm planning for next month, so pay attention. All right, so on this artboard here, I definitely want more of a darker feel. So I'm going to start very simple. I'm going to select the entire artboard, and in the properties inspector to the right, choose the appearance section, and I'm going to set the fill. Let's just go, a really pure black. Not completely black, but just a little bit above. There we go. Anahit says, quick Unrelated XD question, is there a way to make a button go to a section of another screen as opposed to the top of the screen? So I don't believe so at the moment. Anchor links, which is probably what you're talking about, goes to different sections on a single artboard. Doesn't at the moment go to sections on another artboard. Maybe in the future, but not at the moment. All right, so we have our artboard looking pretty good. And now we want to start adding some content. So I'm gonna grab my rectangle tool, shortcut key R, and drag one out right about here. This is going to be the header of this. You can imagine this is a profile, potentially, right? And we might want to round out the corners a little bit, just give it a little bit of style. Now, if I round out the corners by pulling in one of these handles, it's going to round out all the corners. And you may want that in some cases. Let's leave it around 42. But you may also not want that in some cases. So you can unround out some of these corners either within your properties inspector, right here to the right. You can click on this icon here, and then you can enter in specific values for specific corners. Or for example, if you want to just completely unround, is that a word, unround? I don't know. If you want to unround the corners of the top and the top left, top right, you can just hold down Alt or Option and drag it back just like that. Perfect. All right. Gary, welcome Gary. I've got a question. XD mentioned some exciting prototyping features coming in 2021. Give us a hint. Oh, Gary, great to see you, by the way. I wish I could give you some hints, but I am definitely not at that level where I can. Follow Andrew Shorten on Twitter. All I can say, I've been playing around with some of them, and yeah, it's gonna be a good year, especially if you like prototyping features in Adobe XD, but that's all I can say. I wish I can say more, but you know, follow us all on Twitter, and when the time is right, we will definitely, let you know. All right, so we've got our header container at the top looking nice. And if I hop over to Finder or Explorer on Windows, I've got some wonderful neon images that I want to use. I'm on a neon kick lately. Don't know what it is, but neon is wonderful. So I've got this fun image here. I mean, just look at that. Look at those colors, right? Drag that directly into XD, pop it into that particular container, and we now have our header looking great, right? Perfect. So a few more things we might want to add in terms of the containers for this particular experience, and we'll get to some icons at the top in a moment. But right here we might want a profile picture of this particular user, and maybe down here we might want a container to fit some of the fitness activity sections or elements. Cornell is asking, what are you creating in today's episode? So we are creating this. There we go. So we're kind of exploring the new animated dashes and gaps in XD, and we're creating this fitness tracker or challenge, whatever you want to call it. And we're going to look at some advanced tips and tricks as well. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to grab the rectangle one more time. I feel like half of my episodes are just all using rectangles. All right, pop that into place. Let me zoom in here so we can see what's going on. And I'm gonna round out the corners of this as well. We're gonna stick with those rounded corners right about there. And let's go 18 pixels, looks pretty nice. And then for this one, we might want the user's profile picture. Now, of course, we could go ahead and jump back into Finder, grab an image like this one and pop it into place. Or, and I know many of you know exactly what's coming, you can refer to the toy faces. Cody probably has a link for toy faces. I absolutely love this set of avatars. And I think that the whole entire set was $10 when I purchased it. I think it might be still $10. But there's just some amazing, colorful, diverse faces, and you just pop any of them directly into XD. And if you had them in your library, they're gonna come in linked. So if they do update in your library, they'll update on your document. Now, of course, if you don't want that link, you can always right-click and press unlink. Thank you, Cody. Appreciate that. All right, so we have our user right here looking great, and we may want a little bit of a border, not just on the inside of this particular avatar, but also on the outside. If it's a social media application, they may have borders to indicate whether or not this person has a story, right? And I also did post a little bit of a hint of a story feature or story design I've been working on for next month's DCC on Twitter, so check that out as well. So I'm gonna add a bit of a border on the inside of this avatar. Let's go ahead and set the color to black and then just drop the opacity just a little bit to give a little bit of depth. Nothing too crazy, just a little bit. And then on the outside of the border, I don't want the border to be perfectly aligned with this shape. So I'm actually going to duplicate this. Let's go ahead and turn off the fill. And I'm going to enlarge it from the center. Now you can't see the border because the opacity is very low. So I'm going to change this to a nice bright pinkish red, just like that. Oh, so Henry's asking, have I got my toy face yet? I have, Henry. Right down here. I haven't put it on a background yet, but... oh, it's large. Look how big these are. It's me! It's me as a toy face. Look at that. Isn't that fancy? I don't have my glasses. Where are my glasses? I don't know. Can't find my glasses. They're around somewhere. But it's me. I love it. He did such a great job. I will incorporate that at some point. So I've enlarged this shape and obviously it's looking weird, right? And that's because the rounded corners remain the same as you're enlarging the shape. And visually, a larger shape needs more rounded corners to match the shape on the inside. So I'm gonna just grab this and bring this in a touch. And that looks a little bit better. I'm gonna shift this up a little bit. That's looking good right about there. And maybe I can just bring this, bring this in a little bit and just tweak this like that. There we go. Everyone's loving my toy face. I love it too. It's wonderful. All right, so we've got our avatar looking pretty good. It might be a little bit large. We'll see. I'm gonna go ahead and group these two elements, Command and Control G, and call this avatar. Wonderful. All right, so now right down here behind this avatar, we want that main container that's going to house all the information about this fitness application, right? So I'm gonna grab my rectangle one more time. There's the rectangle again. And I'm going to draw one out like this, going down the artboard. I'm not too worried about how long it is. We can always adjust that a little bit later. And I'm gonna make sure that this particular container is behind our avatar. So I'm gonna drag it behind. I'm gonna name this container. And I'm going to, just like we did with the other elements, round out those corners. Let's go for 24, that looks pretty good. And I may want, we have a lot of room up here, so I may want to actually just grab these elements and bring them on up and just maybe rearrange this a little bit. All right, so we've got our container. Now, of course, we're going for a more darker feel. We love this neon vibe, right? And what I want to do for this particular container, which I'm going to make a little bit longer, just like that, is, darken it a little bit. Now, there are two ways we can go about this. One, we can choose the fill, set the color to black, and then maybe decrease the opacity a touch, right? Maybe we can even brighten this color just a little bit, right? It's okay, right? We want to get fancy with this, because of course we do. It's Friday, it's Fancy Friday, as Cody says. Let's get fancy. So, I have the color set to black. I'm going to go ahead and enable a background blur right down here at the bottom of the Properties Inspector, just like that. And already it's looking okay. Looking a little bit bright, possibly. So I'm going to drop the brightness a little bit. And I might want to bump up the blur and see what that looks like. And what I love about background blurs is it takes some of the colors and some of the images and elements behind it, and it brings it in, but it also blurs it so that it's not too difficult to see some of the elements on top. If I were to take this background blur, the amount slider, and drop it down, it's okay, it still looks okay, but if you have text on top of it or images, it might cause some issues with accessibility, right? So bumping that blur all the way up to 50 has this nice diffusion, so it looks really nice. So I might leave it at this, but what I might want to do, because we have a very dark container on a dark background, is just add one more thing to help separate it from that background, and that's going to be a border. Now, of course, you can go ahead and play around with the color, but what I like to do in this case, especially when it's a dark color on another dark color, set the border to white, then actually bring down the opacity quite a bit, somewhere around, I don't know, 7% possibly. There we go. So someone's asking, what's the best tool for designing 3D illustrations like the toy faces? To be honest, I don't know. I know a lot of people use Blender, a lot of people use Cinema 4D, which is included with After Effects. There's like professional grade ones, things like 3D Studio Max or Maya. ZBrush is also fun, but probably not great for things like this, but I'm not sure what he uses, but maybe you can ask him on Twitter, I'm not sure. All right, so we have our container looking pretty good. I may actually want to, one thing you can also do is bring up the effect opacity right here at the bottom. And what that is going to do is bring in some of the original color from your fill. So in this case, I have it set to black. So if I increase it, it's going to bring some of that black back in. Of course, if I go all the way to 100%, it's going to be pure black. So just a little bit, just to darken it even more, and that looks pretty good. I might want to darken the background a little bit as well. There we go. Maybe I'll brighten this just a touch. Honestly, I can spend hours just obsessing over these very small values. And Aubrey just nailed it. The little details make such a difference. And seriously, I spend literally hours just like tweaking small little colors until I'm happy. And then at the end of the day, we're never happy, right? It is what it is. All right, so what we're gonna do next is we're gonna add some information about this user. So with my text tool, shortcut key T, I'm gonna type out Maria. Make this a little bit larger by pulling on that handle. And I might want to get a little bit fancy with this typeface. Not too fancy, but just a little bit fancy. So we're going to go for, let's say, Josephine Sans. It's a pretty fun typeface, and I might want to bold. Bold looks okay. Change the color to white so it's nice and visible. We can also play around with the character spacing, line spacing if you want to. Pop that there. And then right below, we might want one more text layer to maybe indicate where this user is from. So one more text, let's go for Toronto, Ontario. Now, because this is secondary information, we definitely want this quite a bit smaller. So I'm gonna drag this handle down. And usually on secondary information or subheaders or whatever you might wanna call it, you drop the weight as well. You probably don't wanna go something like light. It's gonna be a little bit difficult to see, especially if you press play. It's not terrible, but it is a little bit difficult. And let's try regular. Not bad. And I might want to also drop the opacity a little bit. You don't want to go too dark, because if you do something like this, then accessibility, you don't want to deal with that. So maybe somewhere around 50%. If you press play, that could work, right? We're going to leave it at that, and we are going to move on to the good stuff. Actually, one more thing before we move on to the actual, Toronto. Woo. I can't wait to actually travel again and go back home to Toronto. But before we get on to the actual progress circle, we might just want a button at the bottom of this container that allows a user to take an action. So for that, I'm going to grab my rectangle tool one more time, drag one out, make sure it snaps into the center of this box. And because we're going with rounded corners for many elements on this design, I'm gonna go ahead and just round them out completely. And what I want to do now is start talking a little bit about assets, start talking about components and states and that sort of thing. So we've got our button looking pretty good. And now at the top, we also started to define, if I dive in here, some of our colors that we're going to be using throughout this project. We've got this nice reddish pink color, right? And I may want to bring this color in to several elements. So I do have this selected. I'm going to go down here to the bottom to my libraries panel. And this is where you're going to find not only your libraries, but also your document assets, which is the default view when you do go to this panel. And you have your colors, your character styles, and your components. I'm going to press the plus button beside colors. It's going to add that pink directly there. So now if I go down to this shape over here, I can simply click on it. It's going to add it in. Maybe I'll make this a little bit smaller, like that. And then for the inside, we want some sort of text so a user can perform that action. So with the text tool again, let's go ahead and type out challenge Maria. This is a call to action, so I am going to bump the weight up to, let's try bold, see what that looks like. I definitely want to make this quite a bit larger. I feel like 24 might be too large. It's not bad. I might want to drop it just a little bit, maybe 22. And what I stress every single time I'm designing, because I love designing very much zoomed in. As you can tell right here, this button is basically in my face. Sometimes I'm even closer. You lose track of the perspective. You lose perspective of what the design actually looks like. So when you're zoomed in, either press the play button right at the top just to kind of see everything, how things are looking, or Command or Control return. That'll also launch the preview. Shibley saying it would be great if XD had the device prototyping to see how the screen looks on different devices. So, okay, so I think what you're meaning is, you know, when you press play at the top, you would like to see it inside of like an iPhone or an Android device. That's definitely something I would like to see as well. And I believe at one point, don't quote me on this, I believe at one point somebody internal was exploring that. I don't know where it is in the process of being prioritized, but you know, there are definitely things that are more prioritized on our roadmap, but it was being explored at some point. But you can also, you know, plug your phone or tablet directly into your computer and then see on a live device, see how things are looking. All right. Oh, someone's leaving. I have to go. See you later. Great hanging out today. All right. So again, just preview, see how things are looking. And you can also, you know, have this off to the side. And then as you make changes, it updates live on that preview over to the left. Or right, wherever you put it. All right, so we've got our button looking pretty good. What I want to do now is turn this into a component so that I can use this button across multiple screens and also be able to keep it up to date. So I've gone ahead and selected both of these elements. I just held down my Shift key and clicked on both of these layers. And then in my assets, right over here to the left, I'm gonna press the plus button beside components. You can also do the exact same thing within the properties inspector to the right. Now, once this component has been created, again, it allows you to keep these up to date. And this over here is the main component. It's the one with the solid green diamond. And if you don't know where that main component is, if you have an instance, let's go ahead and duplicate this artboard. This over here is an instance of the main component, which is a hollow diamond, right? So you can right click, press edit main component, it'll take you directly to that main component and you can make changes. So if I did decide to unround out these corners, right over here, it updated that as well, which is great. And you can also create additional states. Now, this is a mobile device, so hover doesn't really apply, but just for the sake of showing you how this works, if I press the plus button, I can create a new hover state, right? And I'll keep it very simple. I'll just maybe change the color to a little bit darker. And now if I go back to the default state, press play, and then hover, we've got a hover state, right? And let me go ahead and create one more state which we might want to use, and this might be an outline state. And for here, all I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the fill, set a border color to white, and then maybe increase the size just a little bit. And now we have an outline state. So this could be like a secondary button, for example. Now in this particular case, we may not want to use it, or what we can do is maybe we can make this one smaller. Obviously the text has to be changed, right? Maybe this could be challenge, and then we can duplicate one over and switch over to the outline state, and then, you know, have the secondary button there. But for now, we're gonna keep it as is. All right, so now we can get to the good stuff. Whoops, don't need to save it right now. Cloud document, it's saving in the background. All right, so right over here, what we want is we want a few progress circles so that we can track you know, fitness on a day-to-day basis. And what I especially want is to be able to interact with this particular progress circle using components and states. So I'm thinking we might have 3 different circles. And let's go ahead and just start creating almost like this guide. So right over here, you know, maybe we can use this, we'll use a different color. Maybe let's sample this color, but also maybe we'll just pull it out a little bit, just like that, right? And then this might be for steps. I'm gonna make this quite a bit smaller. Now, since this particular typeface is a little bit more on the fancy side, a little bit, I'm gonna actually just drop this and switch it over to Poppins, which is a little bit more traditional, slightly more traditional, and we'll go for maybe medium. It also has a few extra weights in there. So this might be for steps. It's looking a little bit small. Maybe I'll bump it up to semi-bold. There we go. Yeah, it's still a little bit small. All right, that could do. So that's for steps. I'm gonna make sure to group these, call this steps, duplicate this over, and then we might want exercise. And this one, we're gonna shift the color to more of a purple. And of course we can change these colors later on as we need to. And this one is going to be maybe your move gold. And maybe we'll go for a nice blue for this one. Perfect. And I'm going to change the name here and then snap it to the button right there. All right. Let's make sure these are all aligned by hitting the distribute horizontally button right here at the top, and that looks pretty good. All right, so now we can use these colors to start creating our progress circles right here at the top. Now, they're gonna be made up of several different elements, and we're gonna start with one, probably the largest one, which might be steps. And I'm gonna grab my ellipse tool. I could grab my rectangle if I really wanted to, but we're gonna start with our ellipse and draw one out. We're gonna make this nice and large, because we'll be having 3 progress circles inside of this particular section, right? There we go. Perfect. Now, all of these progress circles are going to be simply border based. So I'm going to turn off the fill and we're going to set a border. We're going to go ahead and sample this color that we've been using here. But what I also should do is just select these groups and in my assets, just add all these colors at once, right? Pops them in there very nicely. So if I do have this shape selected and I want to apply this as a border, I can simply right click on that color and apply as a border. I'm also going to increase this quite a bit. So we have these nice thick borders. Perfect. Okay. So that's the first one that we're going to be using for steps. Now there's going to be 2 for every single one, except the last one. We're going to talk about that in a moment. But for every single one, there's going to be basically 2 shapes that make it up. An inactive or unfilled version and also a filled version. So this one here is going to be, let's say, steps inactive. And what we're going to do is we're going to just drop the opacity to around 30%. This is the part of the circle that has not been filled in yet. And then there's going to be an active part. So I'm going to duplicate this, Command and Control D, and set this back up to 100%. I'm going to change this to active. And I can grab these and put them into a group and just call this steps, just to keep things organized. All right, so we've got our 2 different shapes, right? But of course, currently, the active is overflowing and filling the entire thing. But we want to start at a position where it's not filled in yet, or it's just partially filled in. And that's where the dashes and the gaps come in. So down here in the Properties Inspector, we have the size of this border set to 18, but we have the dashes and the gaps set to 0. What we're going to do is we're going to increase the gap quite a bit, because essentially what we want is we just want one little line that will allow it to fill in. And we want basically a very large gap. So if I do something like 1000, it's going to almost look like nothing, right? We've got the little tiny sliver right up there, and that's exactly what we want. And if we start increasing our dash, I'm going to hold down my Shift key and increase it like that. It's going to start filling in, right? Wonderful. Now, because we're going with this very, curvy feel all the rounded corners and everything, we might also want to pull that in to our dashes and our gaps, right? So right down here, I can go ahead and round out the cap. And now we have this fun looking, really smooth, progress circle that we're starting to build out. Perfect. So steps is complete. And I think I'm okay with the size of this. We're gonna see. Once we add the other 2, we might wanna make some tweaks. Now, for the second one, I can duplicate this entire group, Command and Control D, and this is going to be exercise. I'm also going to dive in here and change the names, or what I can do is I can just have active and inactive. I may not necessarily need the repetition of the layer names, right? Perfect. Now for this one, I'm going to go ahead and hold down my Alt-Option key and my Shift key and scale them both in just like that. Right? And then in my assets, I do have these colors saved, so I can right click, apply as border, and there we go. It's that simple, right? And we're gonna do one more. Let me actually bring this in just a little bit more. And we're gonna duplicate. This is going to be move. Perfect. And we're gonna bring this in. Assets, right click, apply as border. So we have a few of our progress circles looking pretty good. If I go ahead and press play at the top, Okay, they are looking a little bit large. So I'm actually going to go ahead and select all of these groups. Maybe bring them in just a little bit, just like that. I can also group the entire thing and maybe bring this down to 200. Whoops. Let me turn off responsive resize in this case. Maybe I don't know. That might work actually. Possibly. Or do we want to go a little bit larger? Maybe let's go for 220. That might be a little bit better. All right, so we have our progress circles, right? And what I'm thinking is we want to get a little bit fancy with maybe one or two of them. Maybe the move one, for example. We might want it to go all the way around and then kind of overlap and, if you're familiar with the Apple Fitness Tracker on your phone, right? If you've moved or stepped or exercised more than your goal, it goes around and there's a little bit of a shadow that shows up and then it kind of keeps going. So we're going to get a little bit fancy with that. But before we do that, I want to show you how this can animate. So let me start these in a fairly low position. I'm just going to simply decrease the dashes, right, of these. Maybe I'll just decrease this one a little bit. And this one, maybe I'll increase it just a touch, right? So what we can do now is, eventually we're going to, let me move this, let me delete this. Eventually we're going to turn this into a component. But for now, I'm simply going to duplicate this artboard because I don't want to turn it into a component just yet. And I'm going to hop into prototype mode and let's go ahead and select the entire group of progress circles, drag the handle to the second artboard. We'll use a tap trigger and we're going to go for auto animate for the type, ease in and out, and we'll do a fairly long duration of about 4 seconds. And now if I press play and I tap, what happened here? What did I do wrong? I did something wrong. What did I do wrong? That's a good question. What did I do wrong? I didn't change the gashes or the dashes. That would help. So when you have the second state, whether it's a component or an artboard, what you'll want to do is dive back into your progress circles and increase the dashes. So I'm just, again, holding down my shift key and using my up arrow like that. And we'll do this one here. There we go. So now if I do this one more time and I tap, look at that. We've got this fancy looking progress circle. But of course, we wanted to get a little bit more fancy with this. So I'm going to delete this for now. Now, again, what I'm thinking is on this particular one here, this blue one, it's going to go past this point here. Now, what you're going to notice is if I increase the dash all the way and it gets to this point here, it allows me to keep going, right? But you can't really see anything. And even if I went to try to put like a shadow on it, just like this, you can't see because it doesn't really overlap on top. It just kind of melds with each other. So what you need to do, you need to get a little bit creative. And that's what we're going to do right now. So this move circle is actually going to be made up of 3 different pieces. It's a little bit confusing, but bear with me. So we've got actually 4 pieces. We've got our inactive section or shape. That's not going to change. The active sections, we're going to have 3 active ones. Again, a little bit confusing, but bear with me. We're going to duplicate one just like that. And this one is just going to go in the background. So we're going to leave this one here. It's just going to be there so that it fills in behind so that we don't have these weird gaps. Now, this second one here, right, we're going to actually duplicate this one more time. I'm going to hide this just for now. But this second one here is going to be the one with the shadow. So I'm going to start by adding a shadow just like this. We're going to have a fairly subtle shadow. We can always adjust it afterwards. Actually, what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and move this one. I'm just going to rotate this just for a second, just so I can see what the shadow is looking like. I'm going to set the X and Y values both to 0. And I'm going to increase this a little bit, just so I have a fairly subtle shadow. And there we go. All right, perfect. So let me go ahead and bring this back to 0. Great. And I'm going to have this one start at a fairly, I don't know, somewhere about 30. And I want to do the same thing for this one. And then this one here, the point of this one at the very top is to hide the shadow on the other end. So when this one, again, this is a little bit confusing, but when this one goes all the way to the end and then overlaps eventually, we want basically this side here to be covered. Again, very confusing now that I'm kind of talking about it out loud. But I'm going to go ahead and unhide this, and we're going to start this fairly low. And this one here, this active one, this is the one that's actually going to be moving and going on top. I'm going to rotate it slightly, about 30, right? And then make this a little bit larger. Okay, there we go. Again, much of this might not make sense right now, but hopefully, once we actually get to animating, it might. Possibly. We'll see. All right, so that's looking pretty good. Now what we want to do, we want to also add some elements that will allow us to tap and transition to another circle. So what I'm going to do is over here to the left, we might want an arrow. So with my pen tool, shortcut key P, I'm going to show my grid or my guides, grid, yeah, and then just go ahead and create an arrow, just like that. Make it a little bit larger. I'm going to set the color to white, make it nice and thick, and then maybe round out the caps and the joints, just like that. All right, pop it right about there. And on this side, the left side, it might allow you to go to the previous day, and then there might be one on the right side as well, and maybe there is no day that you can go to at the moment. So this one will just drop to about 30%. Now if we take a look, it's looking okay, right? All right, so I think we're at a pretty good spot where we can start turning this all into a component. So what I want to do is I want to make sure to select the progress circles and also the two arrows. So this will be next and then previous. So I'm going to select all three of these elements, and I want to turn all of this into a single component. So you can do that in your assets, or you can press the plus button beside component in the properties inspector, right? And then once that's done, we already have our initial state created. We want to create a new one. So I'm going to go ahead and press the plus button one more time, create a new state, and this will be maybe yesterday. There we go. Now, if I dive in here, because we go back to the previous state or previous day, we will be able to go back to the next day. So we can dive in, set this to 100%, just like that. You can press the 0 key on your keyboard, and now we can start altering the dashes just like we did before. So on this one, I can just hold down Shift, use my arrow, just like that. And of course, you can go ahead and enter a value in your properties inspector as well. Let's say 400. That looks pretty good. Now, here comes the slightly confusing one. The move one, where we're getting a little bit creative with it. And it may not work the first time. We may need to make some tweaks, but we're gonna see what happens. So I'm gonna dive in here, and I'm gonna start by selecting the one that's actually gonna move, and that's the one with the shadow. So I'm gonna start by increasing the dash quite a bit. And I'm also going to rotate it. So I'm going to hold down my Shift key and just rotate it around so that it can also go, past that starting point. And this is kind of why I have this extra shape in the bottom, because when we rotate it, we're going to have this empty slot, right? So this is why I just want to increase the dash on this one to fill in that slot, right? Is there any way to outline strokes in XD? Not at the moment, but I believe that could be being explored at the moment. We'll see. Lots in the works. So now you're probably noticing why I have this extra shape at the top, right? It's because we don't want to see this shadow right here. We want to see this one because it overlaps, but we don't want to see this one. So for this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the dash, right? But I don't want that shadow covered. I actually want this one covered. So I'm going to rotate this like that. There we go. All right. Brett says Shift arrow key is a handy tip. Didn't know about that. Indeed. Speaking of shift and arrows and things like that. If you want to enlarge objects, let me very quickly, before we get to animating, got the square here, right? If you want to enlarge it, maybe 1 pixel on the left or the bottom, hold down your Command or Control key and use your down arrow to enlarge 1 pixel down, or right arrow to enlarge 1 pixel to the left or the right, right? And if you hold down your Shift key as well as your Command or Control key, you can enlarge by 10 pixels at a time. Fun little tip. All right, so we've completed this, right? And if all went well, it should work quite nicely. So we have our 2 states. We have our yesterday state and we have our default state. And now we can go ahead and wire this thing up. So in prototype mode, we want to start by selecting the object that a user will tap on. In this case, it's going to be this left arrow, and I'm going to simply click on the blue handle to the right. This will allow me to choose a state within the properties inspector. Right here, we're going to choose the yesterday state. Tap trigger is great, and we'll do the same, ease in and out with a duration of 4 seconds. Now, if all went well, we should be able to tap on this, and not only will the steps and the exercise progress circles go to their end location, but the move one should appear to go all the way to the end or the beginning and then overlap. We may have some tweaks to do, but let's see what happens. Oh, it worked. Didn't have to do any tweaks. Well, that's fancy. That almost never happens, right? Let's do that one more time. Let me see if I can zoom in so you can see what's going on. Oh, I have to go to my... Actually, before I do that, I might as well, while I'm here, I'm on the yesterday state, I might as well go here, click, and go back to our default state. All right, let's zoom in and see it one more time. Here it goes. Fancy, right? It's the little things in life that make me excited. It's also the things that are not supposed to be possible, but I find ways, right? That's what I love about XD, and just like design in general. This feature came out, and even though technically you can go around, keep going around, there's nothing visually that lets you know that dash is continuing to go. So you find ways of kind of getting around it. Now, one thing I do want to also do is add a little bit more style to this. Now, because these are borders, we can't apply gradients on them. So we have to find more workarounds. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop into the default state of the main component, and I may want to create a circle, just like this. And this is going to help me add a little bit of shadows and highlights to our progress circles. So instead of a solid color, we're going to go for a linear gradient, and maybe we'll go from left to right. And the color on the left is going to be maybe a slightly darker color. And then the color on the right is going to be slightly lighter. We may have to alter this, but we'll see. And then we can go ahead and change the blend mode to, let's say, overlay. It looks okay right now, but once these actually start filling in, it's going to look a little bit better. And because I'm editing the default state of that main component, if I go to the yesterday state, we can now see that that gradient is also available right here, right? So we can play around with this. Now, I am editing at the moment a state within the main component, so it's not going to push the changes to the main, but I'm just experimenting here. But I think overlay looks pretty good. And let's go ahead and... yeah, I think that color looks okay there. Well, a little bit darker, maybe here, a little bit darker as well. And it just adds a little bit of shading to this, right? Now again, I have to add it to the main component, so I'm going to simply copy this. And then over here, I'm going to paste the appearance. Perfect. Now, the default state's a little bit too dark, so I might alter it a little bit, but we can now see as it's filling in, we have, right, some fun looking effects. And we can go back. Not bad. Now, maybe in the initial state, when most of it is not filled in, we might actually want to take this gradient and maybe just drop the opacity a little bit. And then in the yesterday state, we can make sure that the opacity is back up to around 100%, or close to it. There we go. Looks pretty good. And if you need to, you can also dive in here, make some changes to these. Oops. Inactive, maybe I'll bump the opacity up a little bit, maybe to 40% possibly. I can do the same thing for this one. And where did it go? And the inactive one on move as well. All right, I'm kind of digging it. Now, another thing we can do, if we want to get really fancy, which of course we do, right, is put some sort of tracker in the center. Maybe it's like percentage, for example, right? So if I dive in here, I can go ahead and select my text tool, and let's go for, let's say, 42. Just like that. And we also want percent, but we don't want to include the percentage sign or symbol with the actual text layer because we're going to use a mask and we're going to kind of animate this as well. So I'm going to duplicate this over and we'll do a percentage sign right here. Let's see what, if we drop back to Josephine Sans, what does that look like? Interesting. Maybe bold. Okay. That could potentially work. So we've got percent, and we've got 42. And of course, if you want to go from, let's say, I don't know, like 20% all the way up to 90%, it's going to take a lot of numbers. But let's go ahead and dive in here, and we'll do 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48. We're not going to do all the numbers because that'll take way too long. But we'll start with that. And then what we want to do, we obviously don't want to see all these other numbers down towards the bottom. So I'm going to grab my rectangle tool, draw one out just like this, and we're going to use this as a mask to hide everything else. So I'm going to make sure to select that layer I just created, also select the numbers layer. I don't have to worry too much about the percentage sign, but under the object menu, we're going to go mask with shape. And that will allow me to hide all the other numbers that are outside of that particular rectangle. Rotate them a bit in 3D dimensions. So it's an interesting point you bring up, Cornell. If we were using two artboards, I would be able to do that. But at the moment, 3D Transforms is not supported inside of components. You can rotate the entire component, but you cannot rotate elements inside of the component. The team behind the scenes is still trying to figure out that challenge. It is a little bit of an engineering challenge to get that done and working with components. So they're still working on it, but hopefully that'll be available at some point in the future. So we've got that, and you're going to notice, again, because I'm editing the default state of the main component, if I go to yesterday, those numbers are there. So I can dive in here now and just grab these numbers and move this on up to, let's say, 48. Right? So we have yesterday and today. It looks like that one's a little bit, so let me just dive in here. Boop. That's a bit better. Perfect. So now if we play this one more time, I can play, and those numbers also animate as well. And of course, you can go up to as many numbers as you want. You can animate individual numbers if you wanted to as well. A lot of fun things you can do, but that is looking pretty fancy. We can also go back like that. I just love that little gradient and the fact that this one kind of goes all the way around and it adds a little bit extra on this particular progress circle. It's a fun little workaround, right? All right, before we wrap things up, I know a lot of people, when I posted on Twitter, were asking how I do something like this, right? Where you have a background and you have this device here and then it kind of moves. This one doesn't move in particular, but this one, as I'm playing it, it moves. So some people were asking how I do that. Let me show you how that's done. So back over here, what I want to do over to the right is create a separate artboard that I can use for this. And by the way, I would probably at this point add in a navigation bar. Let me actually cheat a little bit. I'm going to grab a navigation bar from another document. and pop it. Oops, I missed something. And pop it into place. Look at that, navigation bar, wonderful. I can turn off the background blur, increase it. That looks pretty good. All right, so what I want to do now is over here to the right, I want to create another artboard that will allow me to add in this element here. So I'm going to go ahead and drag one out. You know what, let's go square. So if I'm posting on Instagram or on Twitter, square usually works really well. Oops. And then I might want some sort of an image in the background. So if I grab my rectangle, I'm going to drag out a mask just like that. And back in Finder, let's go ahead and grab this neon image and whoop, pop it directly into place. I can also drop the color a little bit. So if I set the background color of the artboard to black, I can just drop this in opacity a little bit. I can also play around with the blend modes. Hard light could be interesting. No, not really. We'll see how that looks. All right, so that's in place. And now what we want to do is use this on this artboard here and then animate, right? So what we want to do is want to select all these elements. Now you're going to notice if I select all of this and then bring this over, it's missing this background shape. So what might help a little bit is just to create a separate background shape that you're going to pop right at the very back, just like that. It looks identical as it did before, but there's that shape there. So if you do bring it over to another artboard, it's not going to look really strange. Now, another tip you might want to consider is if you are wanting to keep this presentation up to date, you might want to turn this entire thing into a component. So I have all the elements selected. No, I missed one. Now I have all the elements selected. I can go ahead and turn all of this into a single component, just like that, and it's letting me know that the inner components have been converted into instances, which is the new behavior as of Adobe Max. And now I can duplicate this over to this artboard here, just like that. And if I needed to make changes, you're going to notice it's changing across both artboards, which is wonderful. It's exactly what we want. Now I may also want to round out the corners here. Now I could go ahead and dive in, round out the corners of this shape and the other shape and also the background layer. Or I can also utilize a mask. So if I quickly grab my rectangle, draw this out just like that, round out the corners a touch, and then select that layer we just created and also the component, object, mask with shape, and now we have a nice rounded device that we can use. Now, of course, the point of this is so that we can animate this and present it really nicely. So let's do that. So we have our first state created right here, and let me actually bump this back up. I'm going to duplicate this artboard over to the right, and now we can make some changes. So I can dive in here to this component, switch it over to the yesterday state, and then also alter this entire thing. So I can activate 3D transforms, for example. Let's go ahead and bring this up, bring this forward in space. Maybe we can rotate it a little bit. There we go. And now we can go ahead and wire this up. So in prototype mode, select this artboard. We'll do a simple time trigger. So I'm going to drag the handle to the second artboard. In the trigger section, we're going to choose time. We'll give a little bit of a delay so it doesn't kick off immediately. Auto animate, and then we'll keep ease in and out with 4 seconds. And we press play. There it goes, right? So we have this fun little presentation that we can use. And of course, we can continue getting creative with it. We can rotate it just a touch if we wanted to. Again, going back to, I think what Cornell was possibly asking, we can rotate entire components. We just can't dive in here and rotate the individual elements inside of this component. You're going to notice 3D transforms is now not available. So one more time. Look at that, right? And we can maybe even start this one off, maybe rotate it this way. And then just tweak this until we're pretty happy. Maybe I'll rotate it back, whoops, rotate it back a touch. There we go. And one more time, here it goes. right? Fancy. And we can go back as well. So from this artboard back to the first, maybe it won't be 4 seconds. Maybe it'll be like 0.4. It might be a bit too. It's not bad. It could work, right? There we go. That's it. That's how you work with dashes and gaps and auto animate and masks and gradients and the whole 9 yards. We covered a lot today. But a big thank you to everyone who has joined me in today's masterclass. I hope you picked up on something, and I hope I got your creative juices flowing. A big thanks to Umacorn and Aubrey and Laura, Cornell, Marsha, Golden Rose, Cody, and Henry. Who else is in here? Royal says RIP developer. Yeah, something like this. You know, definitely not developer friendly. I mean, some of it is. Like the progress circles, you see this on a lot of applications, but some of the transforms and presentations and things like that's simply for design purposes and having some fun. So thank you, everyone. I will see you all next time with another XD Masterclass. Stick around. We've got Kyle T. Webster coming up with an illustration masterclass. So stick around for that, and I will see you all next time.